The sun had been merciless all that day, an unrelenting fire in the vast, empty sky. Heat shimmered above the dusty trail where the wagon train creaked its slow way westward. Horses labored under the weight of harness and dust, and oxen trudged on, heads bowed low as though the very land had cursed them. The settlers' men with hard jaws, women bent with care, and children too tired to laugh were bound for promises of land and freedom beyond the horizon. But promises did little to lighten their burdens. Mary Whitlock lay weak in one of the wagons, her skin pale beneath a bonnet stained with sweat. She had been strong, once sturdy enough to haul water, mend torn garments, soothe children with a song. But the fever had taken her quick and hard, leaving her trembling, unable to keep food down, her voice a whisper. To the settlers, sickness was a burden, and burdens slowed a wagon train. Her cousin Ruth avoided her eyes that morning. The men had spoken in low voices the night before, just out of earshot but not beyond her hearing. Words like "too much trouble," "slows us down," and "ain't gonna make it anyhow" drifted through the canvas of the wagon. Mary had begged them silently, praying someone might stand for her. But when the dawn came and the wagons began to roll once more, no defense was raised. At midday, when the caravan stopped to rest the animals, two men came to her. Jacob Hardin, tall and lean with a permanent scowl, carried her meager belongings wrapped in a kerchief. Beside him walked Elias, the eldest of the group, his face weathered as the desert hills. "Mary," Elias said, his voice flat, "you can't go on with us no more. We'll leave you here with water enough for a day. If you're meant to live, you'll live. If not." His words trailed off, as though mercy required no explanation. She tried to sit up, her arms trembling with the effort. "Please," she whispered, her lips cracked. "I can ride in the wagon till I'm strong again. I won't be a burden much longer." Jacob dropped the kerchief at her side. "Burden's all you are now? We'll not risk the rest for one." Her cousin Ruth passed by, head down, clutching her child. Mary reached a hand toward her, but Ruth did not look back. By the time the wagons creaked into motion again, the dust rose and swallowed them whole, leaving Mary sitting in silence on the barren trail. The sky seemed larger without their canvas, tops blotting it, the land emptier without the sound of wheels and voices. Only the chirr of insects and the hollow call of a crow broke the stillness. Mary pulled herself to the shade of a low, twisted mesquite tree. Her body ached with fever, and every breath felt shallow. She drank sparingly from the skin left to her, the warm water thick against her tongue. Hours passed. The sun burned her cheeks, then dipped slowly westward, painting the world in crimson light. She thought of her father's farm in Missouri, of green fields and cool creeks. She thought of hymns sung on Sundays, voices rising in faith. Had God turned his face from her too? As night came, fear crept in. Coyotes yipped in the distance. The land was strange, vast, and alive in ways she could not name. She curled beneath her thin shawl, clutching the kerchief of belongings to her chest, alone, cast off as though her life weighed less than the time it took to wait for her to heal. The betrayal cut deeper than the fever ever could. Not the leaving itself. Death was always near on the frontier, but the ease with which they had done it. No tears, no prayers, no lingering glance. Just the cold judgment that she was worth less than an ox, less than the wood in their wagons. As her eyelids grew heavy, she thought perhaps the desert would finish what the fever had begun. But somewhere in her chest, where despair should have settled, a faint spark stirred. A thought, fragile but stubborn. "I am not done yet." Dawn broke pale and cool, the kind of false gentleness the desert often gave before its cruel heat returned. Mary stirred beneath the twisted mesquite, her throat dry as sand. Her fever had not broken, but her will to cling to life thin as a spider's thread still held. She sipped the last of her water, though every swallow was pain. Her body was weak, her mind floating somewhere between dreams and delirium. She did not hear him approach. The Apache scout moved as the morning breeze itself, soundless, deliberate, unseen until he chose otherwise. His name was Takakota, known among his people for eyes sharp enough to track a rabbit across stone and patience deep enough to outwait the hawk. He had risen before dawn, as was his habit, to range beyond the camp in search of signs, the spoor of deer, the trail of enemies, the shifting winds that told of storm or safety. What he found instead was her. The pale woman lay crumpled beneath the mesquite, her dress torn and dust-stained, her bonnet slipped aside to reveal hair tangled with grit. Her lips were cracked, her skin flushed with fever. Takakota paused a long while, crouching in silence. Many times he had seen white settlers cross his people's land, rolling their wagons west as though the earth owed them passage. Most were trouble, carrying rifles and scorn. But this one had been left like refuse, discarded without thought. He studied the ground, the tracks of wagons, many feet, oxen hooves. They had passed only yesterday. They had abandoned her deliberately. Mary woke then, or half woke, blinking into the light. Her eyes met his, dark and steady above cheekbones carved by wind and sun. For a moment she thought him an apparition, some spirit conjured by fever. She made to whisper, but no words came, only a rasp. Takakota set down his bow. He uncorked the skin at his belt and tipped a few drops of water between her lips. She drank greedily, though he gave her little. Too much at once would kill her faster than thirst. Her hands trembled as they reached for him, but he drew back slightly, watching. He was not cruel, but he did not give trust easily. Still, there was something in her eyes, an ember, faint yet alive. She tried to speak again, her voice a broken whisper. "Don't leave me." He understood enough. Her tongue was strange, but her meaning was plain. He grunted low in his throat, a sound neither yes nor no, and rose to his feet. With a warrior's efficiency, he lifted her slight form into his arms. She weighed little more than a child. The journey back to his people was slow, measured. He carried her across stony ridges and dry washes, his stride steady as the sun climbed higher. Mary drifted in and out of awareness. At times she felt the beat of his heart beneath her ear, steady as a drum. At others she heard only wind and feared she was already in the land of spirits. By late afternoon, the scout reached his camp hidden in a grove of cottonwoods near a stream. Children ran to meet him, but fell silent at the sight of the strange woman in his arms. The elders gathered quickly, their eyes questioning. Takakota laid her gently on a blanket by the fire. She was left to die, he told them in his tongue. I found her. Some frowned. A white woman in their midst could bring trouble, the wrath of settlers or soldiers. Others murmured that to leave her was dishonor. The elders, after a pause, nodded. Then she is under your hand, Takakota. Her life is yours to answer for. Mary barely understood, but she felt the weight of many eyes upon her. Fear pressed in, yet so did a strange relief. She was not alone. As night fell and the women of the camp brought her broth, she thought of the scout who had lifted her from the dust. He had not spoken much, but his presence was like stone, unyielding, certain. She clung to that certainty. As fever gnawed at her again, somewhere deep inside, where despair had nearly smothered her, a fragile seed of hope took root. For days, Mary drifted in a haze of fever and half-formed dreams. She remembered little except the bitter taste of herbs pressed to her lips, cool cloths laid upon her brow, and the murmur of voices she could not understand. Sometimes she awoke to see women bending over her, their hands gentle, though their eyes were wary. Sometimes the children peered at her, whispering to one another before scampering away. But most often, She saw him, the scout who had carried her from the desert. He came at dawn and dusk, crouching nearby, his dark eyes steady. He rarely spoke, yet his presence anchored her to the world of the living. Slowly, the fever broke. The sharp pain in her limbs dulled, her appetite returned, and her mind cleared. Enough to see the camp with new eyes. The Apache lived not in wagons or log cabins, but in brush shelters, low and round, covered with willow and hides. Their camp spread along the stream where cottonwoods cast shifting shade. Smoke curled from small fires. The rhythm of daily life moved around her, women grinding corn, men tending horses, children playing with sticks and laughter. Mary struggled to rise one morning, her legs trembling beneath her. A woman named Nita, stout and serious, came to steady her with a firm hand. She spoke softly in her language, pointing toward the fire where food simmered. Mary understood little, but gratitude shone plain enough. At first, she kept to herself, uncertain, her heart pulled taut by fear of being foreign in every way, her skin, her tongue, her ways. She thought often of the settlers who had abandoned her, and shame burned hot. Had she truly been so worthless to them? Among the Apache, though, no one cast her out. They watched her with curiosity, perhaps suspicion, but they fed her, tended her, and let her live. Takakota, the scout, remained her closest tether. One evening, as the sun bled crimson over the horizon, he brought her a wooden bowl of stew and crouched beside her. Mary tried to speak, haltingly. "Thank you." She pressed her hand over her heart, repeating the words. He tilted his head, studying her, then touched his own chest. "Takota," he said simply. "Takota," she repeated, her tongue clumsy around the syllables. She touched her chest. "Mary." His gaze softened, a rare curve to his lips that might have been the edge of a smile. It was the first exchange of names, the smallest bridge over the gulf between them. Over the following weeks, Mary learned more than she expected. She watched the women gather mesquite beans and grind them to meal. She was shown how to weave strands of yucca into cord, how to patch a tear in a buckskin shirt. Though her hands fumbled, the women laughed not cruelly, but with patience, guiding her until she caught on. At night, she listened to the drums and songs around the fire. The voices rose into the star-filled sky, strange and haunting, yet filled with a power that reached deep into her chest. She did not understand the words, but she felt their weight. Prayers, stories, remembrance. Yet for all the kindness, shadows lingered. She caught the sidelong glances of some who mistrusted her, who saw only a settler woman in their midst. Once, a youth spat near her feet, muttering words she could not understand but whose venom needed no translation. Takota's presence silenced such defiance. His hand on her shoulder, steady and protective, seemed to claim her against hostility. Mary lay awake many nights, torn. Gratitude bound her to these people who had saved her life. Fear reminded her she was not one of them. And always, at the edges of her thoughts, a question burned. Why had Takakota chosen to save me when my own people had not? She would not learn the answer soon, but she knew one thing for certain. She no longer belonged to the trail she had left behind. The settlers had cast her out. The Apache had taken her in. She was caught between worlds, neither fully one nor the other. And though she could not yet see the path ahead, she knew it would be shaped by the man whose eyes followed her with a quiet claim she did not yet understand. By the time the summer sun had begun to mellow into autumn's gold, Mary was walking steadily again. Her strength had returned, though. Her body bore the shadows of fever and hardship. She moved among the Apache women now, helping with daily tasks, her presence less startling than before. Yet though she learned their ways bit by bit, she remained set apart, as if a river still ran between her and them. It was Takakota who bridged that river. He was not a man of many words, even among his own people. Yet Mary felt his presence in every moment, the quiet watchfulness as she learned to weave a basket, the way he stood near when strangers passed through camp, the way his eyes found her across a fire's glow. She did not know how to name it, but she felt it. One evening, as twilight deepened and smoke curled into the cool sky, Takakota spoke before the elders. The firelight threw his sharp features into bold relief. Mary sat nearby, unaware of what was unfolding until she noticed the shift, the circle's attention turning toward her. "She is under my hand," he said in his tongue, his voice steady as stone. "From the day I carried her from the desert, her life has been mine to answer for. Now I claim her as my woman." A murmur rippled through the gathering. Some nodded as though this was expected. Others frowned, uneasy. A white woman, taken as wife, it was no small matter. Mary looked from face to face, confusion pricking at her. The words were foreign, but she felt their weight in the silence that followed. Then all eyes turned to her. Takota's gaze met hers, calm, resolute, unflinching. Nita, the stout woman who had nursed her, leaned close, whispering slowly in broken English. "He. Say you, his woman, bride." The word struck Mary like a stone. Bride. Her breath caught, her heart pounding. Memories flooded her, the settlers, their harsh bargains of marriage struck for land or survival, her own quiet dreams of choosing. Love freely one day, and now this, a claim? Her voice faltered as she whispered, "No, I don't belong." Takota's brow furrowed at her words, though he did not look away. He did not hear refusal, only fear. To him, claiming her was no act of cruelty. It was honor, protection, the promise that she would not be cast aside again. Among his people, such words bound him as tightly as the vows of any preacher. The elders spoke among themselves. Finally, the oldest, a man with hair white as bone, nodded. "So it will be. She lives because of you, Takakota. If you claim her, she is yours." The matter was settled in their eyes, but Mary's heart churned. That night, she sat alone by the stream, watching the moon ripple in the water. A bride. The word wrapped around her like a snare. She thought of the settlers who had left her, a cousin who had not lifted a hand in her defense. None had wanted her, none had cared. And now here was this man, dark-eyed and silent, claiming her not as a burden but as his own. It frightened her. Yet beneath the fear stirred something else, an ember of strange safety. In Takota's claim there was no scorn, no dismissal. He had chosen her when others had cast her away. He found her there by the water, silent as always. He stood beside her for a long while before speaking. "Mary," he said, shaping her name carefully. Then he touched his chest. "Takakota." His hand shifted, reaching lightly toward her shoulder, but stopping short of touch. "My woman." Her breath caught. She wanted to deny him, to shout she was no one's possession, but the words withered on her tongue. Instead, she whispered, "Why me?" He did not answer, not in words she could understand. Only his eyes spoke steady, unwavering, full of a promise she could not yet name. Mary wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, torn between fear and a fragile, dangerous longing. For the first time, she understood that her life was no longer her own to drift as the settlers decreed. A new path had opened, claimed by a man whose heart was bound by honor and whose gaze would not let her go. And whether she welcomed it or not, her future had just been rewritten. Autumn deepened, and with it Mary's place among the Apache grew both firmer and more precarious. Each day she learned something new: how to grind mesquite beans into meal, how to stitch a tear in buckskin, how to carry water balanced in a clay jar against her hip. The women taught her, sometimes with patience, sometimes with laughter at her clumsy attempts. The children, less fearful now, came to tug at her skirts and offer her pebbles or feathers as gifts, but she remained different. Her skin marked her. Her tongue stumbled, and though Takota's claim protected her from scorn, it also set her apart. She was no longer abandoned, but neither was she fully embraced. She lived in a place between. It was not long before whispers of her presence traveled beyond the cottonwood camp. Traders passing through carried word of the pale woman living under the hand of an Apache scout. Soldiers at a fort 2 days' ride heard rumors. Even settlers on their wagon trails muttered of her, some with pity, others with outrage. One evening, as Mary and Nita gathered firewood, they saw smoke on the horizon. Settler smoke not far off. Nita frowned, gripping Mary's wrist firmly, urging her back toward camp. Mary's heart thudded. Were they her people, the same who had left her to die? Or strangers who would see her as stolen property? That night, the council fire burned late. Men spoke in sharp tones. Takakota listened more than he spoke, but Mary saw the tension in his jaw, the way his hand rested near his knife. She caught fragments of meaning: soldiers, danger, white woman. She understood enough her presence had drawn attention. The next morning, Takakota took her aside. His English was broken, but his meaning was clear. White men? They come. They say. You go. He tapped his chest. No, you stay. Mary's breath caught. The thought of returning to settlers twisted her stomach. Would they welcome her? Or would they call her tainted, ruined, unfit? She remembered Ruth turning her face away. She remembered the dust of the wagons rolling on without her. They left me, she whispered fiercely. They left me to die. Takota's eyes searched hers, steady and unyielding. You live, he said simply, here. His hand brushed the earth, then rested over his chest. With me. The days that followed brought unease. Scouts reported that a group of settlers, guided by soldiers, had camped within a day's ride. Their talk was loud and angry of a white woman taken, of rescue, of vengeance. Mary felt the camp's mood shift. Some of the Apache looked at her with suspicion, as if she had brought this trouble upon them. Others stood firmer at Takota's side, unwilling to see one of their own shamed or stolen. For Mary, it was a torment unlike the fever awaiting, breathless fear that at any moment her fragile peace might shatter. One afternoon, as she fetched water from the stream, she heard voices on the wind English, sharp and coarse. She froze, crouching low among the reeds. A handful of riders passed nearby, their faces grim, rifles slung across their saddles. White woman with them, sure as day, one muttered. We'll take her back, no matter what it costs. Mary pressed a hand over her mouth to stifle a cry. Her heart pounded as they rode on. When she returned to camp, her steps unsteady, Takakota was waiting. She told him in broken words what she had heard, and though he did not understand all, her fear told enough. That night, Takakota stood before the fire again, his voice strong. But they come for her. But she is mine. If they want her, they must take her with my life. A heavy silence followed. Mary's throat tightened. No man had ever spoken so for her, not among the settlers, not in the life she had left behind. She felt the weight of his words settle on her shoulders. Both terrifying and strangely profound. She was no longer invisible, no longer cast aside. But being seen carried its own dangers. In that moment, Mary realized her very existence now straddled two worlds, and both might yet tear her apart. The attack came at dawn. The Apache camp still slept in the dim light, smoke from dying embers curling into the chill air. Mary woke to the sound of horses, too many, too close. Then the crack of a rifle split the silence, and shouts rose all around. Children screamed, dogs barked, and warriors leapt to their feet, grabbing bows and rifles. Mary's heart seized with terror. For a heartbeat, she thought it was only a nightmare. But when she crawled from her shelter, she saw them, riders cresting. The ridge, settlers and soldiers together, their weapons gleaming in the first light. They charged with fury, dust billowing behind them. Takakota was already in motion. His bow was in hand, his voice sharp as he barked orders to the younger men. When his eyes found Mary's, they burned with a single command: stay low, stay alive. But the world had no corner safe that morning. Bullets ripped through brush and hide. Warriors answered with arrows, some finding their mark, others falling short. Horses screamed, rearing as arrows bit their flanks. The camp erupted into chaos. Mary crouched behind a fallen log, clutching a stone as if it could shield her. She could have hidden there. She could have closed her eyes and prayed. But when she saw Nita, her friend, her protector, struggling to pull her child to safety, while a settler raised his rifle toward her, something inside Mary snapped. Without thought, she rose. She grabbed a discarded spear lying in the dirt and hurled it with all the strength fever and hunger had left her. It flew clumsily, but true enough, the settler's shot went wild as the spear struck his arm. Nita pulled her child away, eyes wide with shock and gratitude. The fear that gripped Mary did not vanish, but it changed shape. She was no longer a rabbit waiting for the hawk's strike. She was fighting, however clumsily, for the people who had taken her in. Takakota saw her then. Even in the chaos, his gaze caught the moment she rose against danger. A flicker of pride flashed across his face before he turned back to loose another arrow, felling a soldier from his horse. The battle was brief but brutal. Outnumbered, the settlers and soldiers retreated, dragging their wounded with them, leaving 2 of their dead behind. The Apache had losses, 2 youth killed, several wounded, but their camp still stood. Smoke drifted in the air, mingling with the iron tang of blood. Mary's hand shook violently as she sank to her knees, a spear still in her grasp. Her body trembled, her breath ragged. She expected reproach for stepping into a fight that was not hers, for wielding a weapon so poorly. But Takakota came to her, his stride steady despite the blood streaked across his arm. He crouched beside her, taking the spear from her trembling hands. Then he placed his palm against her cheek, rough and warm. His voice was low, certain. "You fight?" he said in broken English. "You stay." Her throat tightened. Tears blurred her vision, though she bit them back. She nodded once fiercely. The others saw it too. Where suspicion had lingered, respect now stirred. Nita approached, her child clutching her skirts, and pressed her forehead briefly against Mary's in a gesture of thanks. Others gave nods, small but significant. She was not merely the strange white woman rescued from the desert. She had stood with them, risked herself for them. That night, as fires burned low and the camp buried its dead, Mary sat beside Takakota. She said nothing, but when he reached for her hand, she did not pull away. Their fingers laced together, a silent vow spoken beneath the stars. Mary knew then that the line between survival and belonging was thinner than she had believed. She had crossed it with a spear in her hand and fire in her heart, that no longer a burden, no longer abandoned. She was one of them. The smoke of battle had barely faded when the whispers began. Word of the skirmish spread swiftly across the plains. Traders told of it at their posts, soldiers carried news back to their forts, and settlers muttered around their campfires. A white woman among the Apache, rescued or stolen, willing or captive. Each retelling painted Mary as something different. A victim, a witch, a traitor. To Mary, none of those stories felt true. She was simply herself alive because one man had refused to leave her behind. Yet the weight of those rumors pressed heavily upon her, for she knew the world beyond the camp would not rest. It was late autumn when the choice came to her. a band of traders arrived one morning, bringing cloth, tobacco, and iron tools in exchange for hides and beads. Among them was a preacher's wife traveling westward with her husband. When her eyes fell on Mary, her hand flew to her mouth in shock. "Child," she cried in English, rushing forward. "You've been stolen. We'll take you back to your people. You needn't suffer here another day." The words cut Mary in two. To hear her own tongue spoken freely again, soft, familiar, like a lullaby, was a jolt to her heart. For a moment she longed to step forward, to let herself be carried away to where dresses were clean and hymns filled the air on Sundays. Then she saw Takakota standing a short distance away, his face unreadable but his body taut with tension. His eyes did not plead, nor did they command. They only waited, dark and steady, as if to say, "The choice is yours." The preacher's wife pressed on, mistaking Mary's silence for fear. "These people cannot keep you. You'll come with us. We'll see you safe. Your own kind will take you in, my own kind." The words struck like a lash. Mary remembered the settlers' faces as they left her behind. She remembered Ruth looking away. She remembered the dust of wagon wheels rolling on without her. She looked at the Apache around her, at Nita, who had nursed her through fever, at the children who had given her feathers and laughed at her clumsy weaving, at the warriors who had bled beside her when the soldiers attacked. And she looked at Takakota, the man who had lifted her from the dust when no one else would, the man who had spoken before his people and claimed her not as a burden, but as his bride. Her voice shook, but it was clear. "I will not go with you." The preacher's wife blinked in astonishment. "But why?" "These are savages. You'll perish among them." Mary's hands curled into fists. She felt a heat rise in her chest, not shame this time, but something fiercer. "They saved me," she said. "When my own people left me to die, they saved me." Silence fell around them. The traders shifted uneasily, glancing at one another. The preacher's wife sputtered, tried again, but her husband pulled her back gently. "Leave her," he said quietly. "Her path is chosen." When they rode away, Mary stood rooted, her breath trembling. She half feared Takakota would scold her for hesitating, for even listening to the woman's offer. But he came to her slowly, laid his hand over hers, and nodded once. "You choose," he said simply. "Now you are strong." The truth of it sank deep into her bones. For the first time in her life, she had chosen her own path, not the one carved by settlers' cruelty, nor the one forced by fear. Her choice was here, with Takakota, with the people who had taken her in, with the land that had nearly killed her and yet given her a new life. That night, she sat by the fire with Takakota at her side. The drums beat softly, voices rose in song, and the stars burned above like endless lamps. She was no longer torn between worlds. She had chosen one dot, and for the first time she belonged. Winter came swiftly to the desert. Frost laced the grass at dawn, and the cottonwoods stood bare against the pale sky. The Apache camp shifted southward, following the game, moving as lightly upon the land as shadows. Mary traveled with them, no longer the fragile ghost who had once been carried in Takota's arms. Her steps were steady now, her shoulders strong beneath the weight of water jars and bundles. She worked alongside the women, grinding maize, stitching hides, weaving reeds into baskets. The children no longer whispered about her but called her by name, laughing when she joined their games. She still stumbled over the language, but she learned more each day. Words of food, of fire, of sky and river. Words of kinship. Words that bound her closer to them. Takakota remained as constant as the mountains. He spoke little, but his presence wrapped around her like a sheltering wind. In the evenings he sat beside her by the fire, sometimes in silence, sometimes teaching her the names of stars or the stories woven into them. She listened, entranced, as he spoke of ancestors who walked the sky, of battles fought long before. Her birth, of the spirit of the land that watched over them still. There were moments, too, when she saw the warrior give way to something softer. Once, as snowflakes drifted like feathers, she caught him smiling as a child tugged at his sleeve, begging for a ride on his shoulders. Another time, she woke to find him draping a blanket more tightly around her as she slept. These small things wove themselves into her heart more surely than any grand gesture. One cold evening, the elders gathered the camp. The circle was lit by fire, the sparks rising into the frozen night. Takakota stood before them, Mary at his side. He spoke firmly, his voice carrying through the still air. She was left to die by her own people, he said in his tongue, gesturing toward her. We found her. We saved her. She has chosen to stay. She has fought beside us. She is not stranger now, she is of us, my woman, my wife. Mary understood enough to know the weight of those words. Heat rose to her cheeks as the eyes of the camp fell upon her. She expected hesitation, perhaps even rejection. But instead, voices of assent rippled through the circle. The women who had taught her nodded. The men who had bled in battle with her raised their chins. Even the children cried out in cheer. A shawl of soft tanned hide was placed across her shoulders, its fringe beaded in colors of the tribe. It was a sign of acceptance, belonging, honor. Tears pricked her eyes as she clutched it close. Takakota touched her hand, steady and warm. Mary, he said in English, carefully, reverently. Then, in his own tongue, he added words she did not yet know but felt all the same. That night, as they sat together beneath the stars, Mary felt a peace she had not known since childhood. She thought of Missouri fields, of hymns sung in Woodin, churches, of the wagons rolling west without her. Those things were gone, lost with the people who had turned from her. But here, among those who had fought and bled and sung with her, she had found something greater than she had dared to hope. A home. She turned to Takakota, her heart swelling with the truth she had long resisted. I was lost, she whispered, but you found me. He drew her close, the firelight flickering over his face. We find each other, he said softly. The night stretched vast and star-drenched around them, the desert both cruel and beautiful. Once she had been left for dead upon its barren trail. Now she walked it with her head high, not as an outcast, not as a burden, but as a woman who had chosen her place, her people, and her husband died in the silence of the desert dawn. Mary's new life had begun.